What I'm going to do here is Anna and I are going to tag team this session. We have some content that we want to talk through, but we're actually purposely trying to block some time to make sure that we have open time for discussion with y'all, because I'll be just very direct and blunt about it. I'm very, very disappointed in all of you. Why? Because Claire and Paul and the team have been pushing very hard to establish the OHDSI Evidence Network. We've tried to provide some incentives and motivations for why that would be a good thing. We haven't heard anybody say that they disagree that it's a good thing. We haven't heard anybody complain that they've had a barrier. We haven't heard anybody complain that they are not able to participate. And yet currently our OHDSI Evidence Network still does not exist in the way that we want it to exist. And so today we're going to provide an additional incentive. And it'll be up to you to decide whether you think this is kind of like a carrot or a stick, but a motivation for folks to be able to participate in the OHDSI Evidence Network. And we also want to make sure that we have ample time to discuss whatever are the practical logistical issues that are preventing you all from participating as part of the OHDSI Evidence Network. I do see this as kind of the foundational element that we need as the next step to move our community forward. And without participation, I think a lot of things are going to unravel pretty quickly. And so it's important for us to take this seriously and as a community focus on contributing our efforts towards this. So just to motivate why I'm going to be talking about this, why I feel kind of pretty strongly about where we need to go. We talk a lot about OHDSI, about all the different ways in which we are trying to collaborate through open community data standards, open source development methods, research, and clinical applications. We want to be able to run network studies to generate evidence and disseminate knowledge to patients that deserve answers. And that depends on us having a data network of organizations who have access to data and have the ability to execute standardized analytics against their standardized data. When we talk about the OHDSI Evidence Network, we're specifically trying to create a mechanism that goes beyond just data as an entity, and more to talk about the relationships that we're trying to establish within the community as part of its evidence network to allow data partner organizations to be able to be part of the evidence generation process and to facilitate knowledge discovery around our entire community so that we can all work together more effectively. Now, when we talk about the adoption of the OMOP Common Data Model, we produce our annual inventory each year where we just ask people who is using the OMOP Common Data Model. And from last year's summary, we saw that we had over 530 data sources in 49 countries, representing 12% of the world's population. And while all of those numbers are super impressive, I think that if we are in a situation where we keep talking about how data has been standardized, but then we don't actually use the data to answer questions, then really what we've done is we've actually just set ourselves up for failure. We've set ourselves up for the situation that we put in a lot of work to do some activity under the prospect that it would deliver some sort of return on and value downstream. But if we don't use the data to generate evidence, then all of that time and effort we put towards standardizing the data is just kind of a waste of time. And yet I'd also say that we have I would actually assert it's almost a moral obligation that if we have access to 12% of the world's population of healthcare data, then all of these open questions that patients and providers and payers and regulators are looking for answers to, if that data can provide the capacity to provide reliable evidence to answer those questions, and we really have an obligation to figure out how to answer those questions as well as we can. And so with that, what we need to be focused on as a community is translating this number of organizations who are OHDSI data model or OMOP data model adopters into OHDSI evidence network participants. And so when we talk about metrics for our community, I want us to get away from just talking about how many people are using the data standard. And I want us to instead be talking about how many community members are using the data standard and are part of the OHDSI Evidence Network such that we have the capacity to actually do right to support public health. And so right now, the challenge that we have is that it's a really exciting number to talk about 534 data partners adopting the OMOP Common Data Model. but it's very distressing to talk about how many sites are actually signing up to participate in the OHDSI Evidence Network, even though Claire and Paul went through very nicely just a couple weeks ago how easy and simple it would be for everybody to raise their hand and participate. So just a quick reminder of some of the aspects that Claire highlighted a couple weeks ago. So data partner organizations is any institution who has access to whether they own or license patient-level data that's been converted to the OMOP Common Data Model, who are willing to consider the possibility that they would participate in generating evidence through an OHDSI Evidence Network study. This doesn't obligate anybody to be part of every study. It just opens the door for them to be willing to want to collaborate. And all we need from you as a data partner organization, what you need to have in place, you basically need to have your data source standardized to the OMOP Common Data Model. That data needs to be held within a relational data structure. That is one of the database platforms that we use as the supported standards within our OHDSI Standardized Analytic Tool Suite, of which Martijn and the team have done a great job of being very supportive of accommodating many different diverse RDBMS standards. And so this is relatively a small lift. What you also need is to have approval from your governance agency and entity to make sure that you can share metadata about your database with the OHDSI Coordinating Center. So just basically having permission to be able to share aggregate information, and then the ability to run the DB diagnostics package, which is an R script that you can run that will basically extract out that metadata for you. So if you are a data partner organization who has those things in place, all you need to do to participate as being part of the OHDSI Evidence Network is you run the DB diagnostics package. It will produce a collection of metadata about your data set. If you've previously used some of the other legacy OHDSI packages, such as Achilles, you'll find that this running DB diagnostics is something that should take like less than a half hour to execute on your environment. And then ultimately, you'll just be sharing this metadata files, which are basically CSV files that will be generated by the package. You'll share them via secure FTP file to the OHDSI Evidence Network, which basically means you're going to be sharing them and putting them on a central server that we maintain at the coordinating center. And we'll provide you the specific encryption key to be able to share that file as soon as you're ready. And then after you've shared your file, your organization will receive an OHDSI account, which will be the mechanism that then provides you a communication process for internal communications about the OHDSI Evidence Network and to be able to facilitate and exchange information between those that are interested in running studies and those that are coordinating their network studies. You'll be listed as part of the OHDSI Evidence Network as a data partner organization on the OHDSI website, and we're actively been working on various ways to provide extra value-added information back to you from the coordinating center in terms of the context of the information that you share. So if you share your information, we'll be able to provide some benchmarking against how your data matches up against the rest of the network that's available, and we'll share that as kind of a helpful utility for you. Now, this is the information that Claire and Paul went through last time. What I want to highlight in this session is that Anna and I are going to be discussing another very important aspect of this, which is even if you don't want to participate in network studies for some reason, why you still want to be part of the OHDSI Evidence Network. And that's specifically centered because this is going to be the foundational element that drives our vocabulary development work moving forward, which is going to be both prioritizing which vocabularies actually get managed within our community, as well as thinking about the tools that we develop, whether you're using them locally for your own research and you don't care about doing network studies, or you want to actually come up with meaningful basis to be able to do network studies. All of that work is going to be kind of predicated on the OHDSI Evidence Network resources that are going to come out of this. So Anna's going to walk you through some of the prior work that we've done in her research with concept prevalence, and I'm going to show you some demos about how this actually works today in practice in Atlas. And then we're going to talk about the vocabulary process, the vocabulary development and release process, how the current decision making is made, and how we're shifting that to be centered on use of the information that we learn from the OHDSI Evidence Network. And from there, we're going to hopefully have plenty of time to be able to discuss with you all about what are your barriers that you're experiencing to joining, and how we can help you to become part of the OHDSI Evidence Network. So with that, Anna, can I turn it over to you to talk about concept prevalence?
And we first wanted to talk about the concept prevalence study, which we conducted 4 years ago. And that was some sort of poor-man's version of the evidence network. But what we did there is we specifically wanted to look at how codes are used across the network. So we collected very basic statistics of the concepts and the frequency of use in the data sources. We created a protocol. We collected the data, and at the end, we got the data from 22 data sources from Japan, Korea, Australia, and US. And at the time, we were very proud of it because it was a large number and it covered more than 375 billion records. So that was really exciting. But of course, now when you think about that, the sample is really small because now we're talking about 500 data sources. So 22 versus 500 is a really small number. And plus, it's not really representative of the whole globe because back in the days, 4 years ago, we didn't get that many, for example, European data sources contributing to the study. Yet, even with these 22 data sources, we were able to observe some exciting findings. And on the next slide, you will see one of the main messages that we derived from that study. And here you see the distribution of the concepts across OHDSI network, where on the x-axis, you see the number of data sets where a given concept can be found. And on the y-axis, you see the number of concepts that can be found in a data set. So for example, the first 2 bars in this red square display the number of terms or concepts stratified by domain that can be found in one data source, that's the first bar, or in any 2 data sources, that's the second bar. And of course, what is really striking and what you can see right away is that there is a large number of concepts that can only be found in one data source. And if we were to transform it into numbers, more than 20% of concepts are unique to a data source. And conversely, less than 1% of the concepts can be found in all of the data sources. What it means is that whenever you want to create concept sets to find patients and you go into literature and find some codes and try to just put them and apply them to your data, you cannot really rely on those codes finding the patients that you want in your data because the data sources are so different. Similarly, if you want to run a network study and you're creating those nice shiny phenotypes, you cannot take your data, your concepts from your data and just assume that these concepts are generalizable to other data sources. That poses a legitimate problem. And remember, this is only 22 data sources out of the network. It's not 100, it's not 200, it's not even half, it's only 22 data sources. So you can imagine how crazy this graph would look like if we were to include more data sources. Of course, this poses a legitimate question of how do we even approach creating concept sets in the network, given what we see here. And on the next slide, I will briefly go over this thought that we had of a tool that uses this whole universe of the concept prevalent concepts from 22 data sources and applies a set of features to that, like lexical features or vocabulary features, to generate the set of recommendations that help you to build a nice comprehensive concept set that will be generalizable to other data sources, not only to your data source. And the screenshots here show how this tool, Phoebe, has been incorporated into Atlas now, and it's been there for a while. Whether you want to use it to find a starting point for a concept set, that is the screenshot on the top, or if you just want to review the recommendations for the concept set that you already created, that is the screenshot at the bottom. And you can use this tool openly, and it provides you not only the recommendations or the starting point, but also the counts. And these counts are coming from that network of 22 data sources that we were able to collect. And even though this tool has been used in many studies now in OHDSI and in many publications, of course, we need to keep in mind two things. First, it's been 4 years, so it's really outdated at this point. Second, it yet again only represents 22 data sources out of the whole network. So the next screenshot will, funny enough, show you the question that is very relevant to this conversation, because the Edburn reacted to the Phoebe 2.0 release message on the forums by saying, well, this is all nice, but how do I actually know whether the data from our data partners was used to generate these recommendations? And my answer was that, well, you're representing European data sources, and the chances are high that your data source is not in the set of recommendations. So that sort of points at the opportunity of using evidence network to get a more up-to-date sample, to get a more representative sample, and to collect more information to solve this very simple problem of creating the code sets, which you would think that problem should have been solved years ago. But yet, because we don't have a comprehensive sample that is up to date, we cannot solve the problem that is as simple as that. And with that, I will switch it back to Patrick, and he will reinforce this point. And you're on mute.
Thank you. So what I actually want to do is reinforce the point that Anna just made with a very specific, tangible demonstration using our Atlas demo environment, and show something that actually throughout our tutorials, we've actually learned that not everybody's even aware how this exactly works or why. So I want to highlight a specific example. And so in Atlas demo specifically, as many of you are familiar, Lee Evans maintains this demo environment for us nicely. And one of the things it does is it provides a synthetic data set called SynPuff, which is basically modeled off of US claims data sources. And for purposes of this exercise, I'm actually just going to use ADHD, attention hyperactivity deficit disorder, to look up information from the SynPuff data. So as many of you are familiar, if you wanted to search for something in the vocabulary, you could just start typing attention hyperactivity deficit disorder. You could type in a term and you can search for it. And I misspelled something, of course, because that's what you do in a attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Maybe ADHD would be better if I actually put the letters together in the correct order. All right. And so when I search for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I can see a range of different vocabulary concepts that show up. And many of you have become familiar with the fact that these concepts are then rank ordered by this set of columns, which contain the record count, descendant record count, person count, and descendant person count. And in this particular case, one could ask, like, where are these numbers coming from? And the answer to the question is that these counts are coming from for your data source. If you have Atlas running, if you have a data source configured, and if in that data source you had run Achilles, then Achilles is providing record counts for all of the individual concepts. And in this particular case, we can see that there's basically one concept that says attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that in the SynPuff data must appear in 4 record counts with a descendant record count of 13. Now, our standard process for defining concept sets, we might say, well, we've now found a concept that's of interest, and we can select that concept. We can add it with its descendants to our concept set. And we can see from this table that we've now identified all the concepts with all the record counts that we had ADHD. And if I look at my concept set, we can follow our typical thing that we would say, demo ADHD. We can see that we have an included concept list of 13 concepts that include that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And also, if I sort now by record count, we can see the other concept that this data source happened to have had, which was child attention deficit disorder. 9 plus 4 equals 13. There's where all of our record counts came from in this particular data source. And so this is kind of the typical process that we might follow. As Anna had highlighted, we could also even go to the recommended tab to see whether or not there are any additional concepts that have record counts that we may be interested in. And when we look in the SynPuff data, we can see that, okay, there's some concepts here with some record counts, but they're the non-specific parent codes. And then there's some other things that are being recommended that have 0 codes. So if my universe, my whole world was just the SynPuff data, I might be relatively happy with this definition of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder plus descendants being my concept set. However, if I had a worldview of the rest of the OHDSI global community, I might realize that this is an incomplete definition to be able to use. And so specifically, one thing that we realized that not everybody was aware of in the broader global community is inside of Atlas, you have the ability to select what is your data source that actually is giving rise to those record counts. And in the Atlas demo environment, the Atlas production source daemon is where we have the record counts from Anna's original concept prevalence study. And so if I switch to that record count and I do a search, now if I search for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I'm going to see a very different story. Now I'll sort by our descendant record counts, and you're going to see that instead of having 13 records, I now have 265 million records for that same concept of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But I'm also seeing a large number of records for some concepts that we didn't even talk about before. I'm also seeing a concept here called adult attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and drug therapy for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, each of which having tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of records. So if I were to go through this process again, I'm going to close that concept set that I created before, and I'm going to basically create a new one. If instead of using the source from SynPuff, I were to use the source from the concept prevalence data source, then now what I would find myself doing is selecting a much wider collection of concepts based on the record counts. I might say, for example, that I'm interested in all of these guys. I'm interested in adult, I'm interested in drug therapy, I'm interested in annual review, I'm interested in those that are on drug therapy, so on and so forth. And I could add this to a new concept set. And when I add this to my new concept set, it's going to be ADHD from the concept prevalence. I can even optimize this to see what does this concept set expression need to look like. And you can see that I've now included a lot more ideas than just attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And in fact, I can even compare this definition that I've created to the first definition that would happen if I had only used the SynPuff data. Oops, and I'll need to save it. And then I'll compare it. And when I compare these two concept sets, you can see that there are 13 concepts that exist in both the original concept set that was created, as well as the concept set that uses the broader concept prevalence. So that's good that we can see that we were saved. Our vocabulary helped us a great deal by taking ADHD plus descendants. We found a lot of the concepts that we would have otherwise missed. However, there are 8 concepts that if I had just focused on the record counts from SynPuff, these are concepts that I would have missed. We would have missed adult attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with its 260,000 counts. We would have missed drug therapy for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with its 10,000 counts. So these are concepts that likely would be something we would want to include as part of our study, but we would have missed them as part of our exploration because we didn't know where the data existed in the network. And as Anna had highlighted, given that 20% of the data concepts only occur in one source, it's very hard to actually know where is the data going to be, which is really what's kind of incumbent upon us to actually have a full representation of our network if we're going to be able to make use of these terms. Now, at J&J, when we use Atlas, we do use record counts from each of the individual sources, but the most powerful thing that we actually do is that we create our own J&J network, which represents the record counts summed across all of our databases. And what that allows us to do is that when we're creating phenotypes, we can create phenotypes and have some level of confidence that at least for the subset of data sets we have access to, that a concept set that we build for one source will probably work for those other sources. But that still presents a very brittle problem that we have, which is just because we've learned that it works for the 12 databases we have at J&J does not mean that it's going to work for the 13th data source. It doesn't guarantee that if I give it to George at Columbia that it'll run at DBMI, or if I give it to Scott at the VA that it's going to work there, or if I give it to Peter and run it on the IPSI database that it's going to work there. The only way that we can actually ensure that we have a line of sight into that is if we all collaboratively share our metadata such that when we're building these phenotype and concept sets expressions, that all of that information is represented in that core corpus that's available. Now, the good news is, assuming that we put together the OHDSI Evidence Network, one of the most valuable resources that we'll be able to create is, in fact, that record count concept, that record count file that can be loaded into Atlas, as well as the recommended tab, the Phoebe algorithm that Anna described, which is based off of that file. So for all of you who participate in the OHDSI Evidence Network, you'll be able to receive that record count file and that Phoebe file based on the OHDSI Evidence Network. If you are out there and you're saying, well, geez, that sounds like a nice file, I'd like to get that, well, please join the OHDSI Evidence Network so that you'll have access to it. All right. Anna, back to you. There you go.
And now we want to talk into more details about how we envision using evidence network to support OHDSI vocabulary development processes. And on the next slide, I want to start with describing what kind of process we had up to this point. So last year we said that we want to be more systematic in the way we approach the vocabularies. And what we did is we conducted a landscape assessment of vocabularies use and community needs. And we were able to collect a pretty good set of almost 200 responses from 144 institutions. And when it comes to the vocabularies use and data, we got the information about the use in 60 data sources. Now, 60 is much better than 22, but of course, 60 is only a small fraction of 500 data sources plus that we have in the community. And we still got some information to base our decisions for the vocabularies based on the 60 data sources. For example, what you see here is the table of the most commonly used vocabularies, both in the data and in research. And this table is ordered by the frequency of use. And you, for example, can see that the most commonly used vocabularies are ATC, CPT4, ICD-10-CM. We yet again do not really see a lot of, for example, European data sources in this file. But we did use this table to guide our decisions based for both for improvements and for refreshes. And for example, on the next slide, I will show you the very specific endpoint of this landscape assessment. We in fact created the roadmap for 2023 to 2024 based on that very table. So we ask people what they use, how often they use it, and we use this information to build a roadmap to outline the vocabularies that we refresh in every release. And for example, we said, well, we saw that ICD-10-CM is used quite often. And here, what you see here at the very bottom in this orange box in the center, ICD-10 family overhaul. So that work has been selected because we saw that ICD-10-CM is used often. But that was 2024. Now we are planning the roadmap for 2025. And we have the list of vocabularies that you can see on the screen that we think would be good to refresh this year. And it has all of the usual suspects like HCPCS or RX norm or SNOMED, but I want to drive your attention to the very last row in this table, which says ICD-10-CM and other versions. In the vocabularies, we have local modifications, ICD-10 from France, from China, from Germany, from other countries. And as the vocabulary committee is thinking about prioritizing our work, they ask themselves this question, well, how do we choose? How do we even know if those local modifications are used in the data? Should we spend our limited resources on refreshing those vocabularies if we don't even know if these vocabularies are used in the data? So this is really where the evidence network would benefit this prioritization a lot, because right now the choices are made based on what committee thinks. And of course, committee is our top leaders in the community from all of the regions, but yet the subjective piece of information that we are missing is the usage of these vocabularies in the sources. Moreover, it not only concerns refreshes, it also concerns the work in individual vocabularies. For example, even before that, I will just briefly say, for example, in the French version of ICD-10, there are a lot of concepts that are not mapped. Now, mapping them is a substantial effort. So we only want to prioritize this work if we know that the community needs this French modification of ICD-10 and that we need to spend resources on that task. The same goes for improvements. That was the next slide that Patrick went to. We also selected the set of improvements we wanted to implement based on the results of the landscape assessment. And we specifically targeted 4 points: SNOMED, ICD family, MEDRA, and ATC, based on how often those vocabularies were used and how often the users reported that they have some sort of issues with these vocabularies. But what we really want to do in 2025 is to use more objective, more transparent metrics on how to choose those improvements, to make sure that the time we spent on those improvements really benefits the whole community and benefits you. And I want to show a more specific example that hopefully will be able to illustrate this point even better. On the next slide, I want to talk yet again about the CPT-4. I'm sure some of you are tired of this topic already, but just to close this loop. So there are CPT-4 visit-related terms that existed and lived in the vocabularies as standard terms with domain observation of procedure. Back in 2023, there was a data partner who came out and said, well, we don't have visits in our data, so we want to use these CPT-4 codes to derive visits. And of course, we wanted to help, so we jumped in and changed the domain of these codes to observation made them non-standard. Oh, no, we changed the domain, mapped them to the corresponding visits. So it seems that that data partner was very satisfied. We pushed that into release. And then after that, after the release, we started getting a lot of the feedback from other partners in the community saying that this solution doesn't work for them. And there were a couple of iterations up to the August 2024, just last week, where we essentially ratified the proposal to revert the changes and make the CPT4 codes standard again in the procedure domain. And that was done because we saw many more people being not satisfied with the solution as opposed to that one data partner who really benefited from this solution. So what it tells us is that we really need some sort of objective metrics to be able to assess the impact of the changes we propose, because there's always a need, there's always the use case. What we want to know is whether those codes are used in other data sources. We want to know how people use them. And moreover, we want to be able to communicate these changes before the release with these data partners, so that you don't have to go on the forums and say, hey, I don't know what's going on with the CPT4. We will ask you about whether you like this change in advance. And we only can do that if we know that these CPT4 codes are used in your data source. So that is for the big changes. I also wanted to highlight on the next slide a small example of other enhancements and how we use counts for the quality assurance work. So there is, we're doing the ATC overhaul because we know that ATC is important for Europe. How we know that? Well, because people send us emails. We don't actually have objective metrics to know if it's important, but people tell it's important. So we've done an ATC overhaul. And what we are doing for this release is that we changed our approach. And now we're taking the relationships between ATC and RX norm from the source vocabularies that somebody gave us at a certain point. And in the slide, in the column source, you can see different drug vocabularies that somebody contributed to us, that we converted into RX norm extension, and that we can now use to derive those relationships. And the last step is to look at these new relationships and see if there are any errors. And for example, this screenshot shows the errors that we had to go through. Now, the whole set of relationships is like 30,000 or something. So it's impossible to review them without having the counts that will prioritize the review based on the most common terms, because we want to make sure that the relationships are correct for the drugs that are used everywhere. And this is where those drug vocabularies were extremely useful, because if you don't have them, you cannot do this work. And this is where the concept prevalence counts were extremely useful, because we can now use them in the quality assurance. But of course, I said that the concept prevalence doesn't have a lot of European data sources. So that yet again goes back to our need of having a more representative sample with a larger number of databases. And as we talk about people contributing their work, I want to finish up with this last slide on the contributions. What we did last year, yet again, we introduced the pipeline for that enables community to bring in their content. And we roughly split it into simple contributions and complex contributions, where simple contributions are fixing mappings, adding new non-standard terms, and so on and so forth. And this pipeline assumes that if you submit something and it doesn't fail and you submit it before the deadline, you will get it in for the next release. And so far, over the course of 2 releases, we had 13 contributions processed, all of those that have been submitted and processed before the deadline. But we also have a growing need for complex contributions. And here at the bottom, you can see that we processed 2 complex contributions so far. These are additions or refreshes of, it so happens, Both of them were drug vocabularies, and we select one complex contribution per release. And that happens yet again because we have limited resources. And there is an even growing need that you can see on the screen. There are 9 requests for the complex contributions at different stages of readiness right now. And what we did on the last committee call is committee looked at this table and basically tried to figure out which of these contributions we should prioritize. But of course, that was a very complex conversation because we don't know what is the impact of this vocabularies and works on the broader community. We don't really know how often these vocabularies are used in the data. So the only thing that we can use in our prioritization is subjective judgment of very smart people, but still it is subjective judgment. And where we want to get is to have objective criteria for prioritizing our contributions, our refreshes, our improvement work. And we really think that evidence network is a perfect vehicle for that, because that will give us the use of the vocabularies and how people are using that. And with that, I will give it back to Patrick.
Great. Thank you, Anna. And given that we have about 5 minutes left, I think I'm going to pivot and not do the last demo, but actually let's open it up for conversation because there's several things in the chat that I think are worth highlighting here. Just to reinforce where we're at and where we want to be. So we want all of you who have access to data to become part of the OHDSI Evidence Network. The steps for that are straightforward. You run database profile, you share your metadata, and you'll be part of that network. Christoph just asked a super important question, which is like, well, what's going to happen sometime in the future when all the 500 databases are in there and then they need to update over time? Indeed, one of the challenges that you just saw from Anna was that when we did the concept prevalence study as a one-off activity, we produced a valuable resource that is now 5 years old. And that resource is now showing the challenges of not being reflective of the community. And so the opportunity by having this not be a one-off study, but really a sustained activity that, Claire and Paul are taking on a heck of a lot of work to try to drive for us, is that all data partners who share their results will have the opportunity to update them however frequently they want. And because we'll know the date that people have submitted their results, we'll also know how out of date that information can actually get. But for us to get started, we need to start by getting sites to be able to share their metadata as a starting point. This information is going to be explicit in making decisions for our community. So concretely, for the vocabulary, we are going to focus on maintaining the vocabulary for vocabularies that are in the OHDSI Evidence Network. If you don't see your vocabularies in the OHDSI Evidence Network, then you should probably suspect that there will not be any support from the vocabulary team in maintaining those vocabularies. Why? Because we have no visibility to know what it is, who it's being used, by whom, when. So hopefully that provides a very specific motivation for those of you who are saying, geez, I want to make sure I'm part of seeing that my vocabulary continues to be part of the vocabulary, become that your source vocabularies are part of the broader global vocabulary. This is going to be an incentive to be able to make sure that you're part of that. On the flip side, by being part of the OHDSI Evidence Network, not only do you get to actually have your vocabulary be part of the overall ecosystem, but now all research that's going to go on is going to be mindful of your vocabulary. It's going to be able to take advantage of the fact that there'll be knowledge about how often concepts are showing up in your given data source. And as folks are developing phenotypes and working through that, they can do that. In terms of, so there's been questions about just like the technical aspects of the tools. So Claire has been running Evidence Network office hours. They have been sparsely attended thus far. But if anybody is running into any sort of barriers, whether it be technical, like you're having challenges running DB diagnostics, whether it be socio-political, like you need some help with insights into thinking about how to get your IRB to approve sharing this high-level aggregate information. Any questions whatsoever about how to run how to be part of the OHDSI Evidence Network. There's a whole collection of us that want to help you become part of this network. So please feel free to just reach out, post on the forums, come to the Evidence Network meetings, reach out to any of us individually. We want to help you become part of this. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to open it up to hear if there have been anybody who has any particular questions or concerns or barriers they're running into to participate, so that we can figure out how to alleviate those log jams and get you to be part of the network. Mark.
Good initiative. Actually, we have been waiting for this. And we are happy. Rwanda, Rwanda has been one of the African countries to OMOP hospital data. We have more than 15 hospitals already OMOPed. And today we are even revamping the infrastructure of OMOPing. The problem to join the network, we need to pass it through ethical committee, even if to share the metadata.
Yep.
We needed to go through it, and we showed, of course, I registered in Rwanda, but I had no feedback, and I still went on, and I downloaded the protocol, which is a high level, and then it was not helpful for them. They said we have to be more elaborate a bit more, say who will access those data, describe more the OHDSI inside, etc. A few things. They are not requesting too much, but they want a little bit more elaborated protocol. That's one. A second thing, they want to have a kind of calibrated research questions, high level, of course. We cannot be exhaustive, but which research questions we are targeting on top of the others. We have a lot of research questions from communities, but we have already one some we think we will start with. So those are a few things I wanted to flag here, and we really hope that.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for your leadership in bringing together the Rwanda data sources. So I think what I'm hearing there is specifically some additional support with augmented text kind of support, expanding for those that are looking for more information than what's contained within the protocol. I think, Claire, that's probably something you and your work group can help Mark in the group with there. I think as it relates to the question of research questions, I think this is something that we collectively have to work to educate folks about, in that we are not answering a specific question, though there are specific questions that can be answered, but rather we're actually trying to create this resource to enable folks to be able to start asking questions. And so that's actually harder from the vantage point of organizations that are thinking that we're just doing research questions, one clinical hypothesis at a time. Here, we really are trying to do something that's kind of enabling and supportive more broadly. But that's something we definitely can work with you on, Mark, to provide appropriate language to see if that will support the committee's review. Valentina?
Hi, thanks. So I have not manifested this, and when you said your speech at the beginning, I felt like, yeah, I should have spoken up earlier. But kind of didn't want to speak about things that would happen in the future necessarily, but I can relate why, for example, on our side, CDAX, we can't just yet enter into this initiative because the data needs to be mapped, and we work on mapping our data. We can only do that project-based, and project-based is research question oriented. So we're going bit by bit. So we're now finalizing the mapping of data related to reproductive health, mothers and children. And so we hope that once we have that package, I've been hoping that I could speak up when we had this ready, and being able to say, okay, now we can do this first part. We have a bunch more other data sources, data information that we can also use, but here at CDAX, we have to work on this. Currently, this is the only way we can work on it, project-based, and projects have time frames and products that need to come out. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to spread beyond the let's say, the variables or the specific mapping for the research question of this one project I'm thinking of. But we do hope to enter this initiative. It's just has to really be baby steps in our case, unless we can figure out a way to help us finance an intensive mapping of all our data, and then that's another strategy. But for now, we are in this approach. But it's great work. I really appreciate all the pushing and the setting up of this. Obviously, will be really useful for the community as a whole to create new connections, right? So.
Great. Thank you, Valentina. Yeah, and I think to your point, I know that lots of organizations are at different stages of their development maturity, and part of the reason we're trying to create something that's sustainable is we just want to get people started. It doesn't mean that that's your end point. You can obviously continue to grow and build as part of this. Right now, what we're trying to do, and what Claire's been screaming loudly, and we're trying to amplify the message, is we just need to know that people want to work with each other and collaborate, and we need people to raise their hand and say, I'm willing to be part of this, and I want to share the information necessary to be part of this. Once we've established that social network of people with access to data with this metadata, I think that there's going to be some really spectacular things we can do for global public health together. But it starts by figuring out that network of getting like-minded researchers who are eager to collaborate, to be willing to raise their hand and participate. And so we think we're not asking for. We know that it's not nothing. We don't think we're asking for too much, given the rewards that everybody should get out of this. But what it really does require is the collective will of all of us to really be serious about being part of an open science community and work together towards this common cause. So appreciate everybody's effort to join us in this. We're going to push super hard throughout the rest of August to try to really get this thing kicked off the ground. And so you'll be hearing more pushes and prods from me and Claire and the broader group, and encourage everybody who can participate to do so. And for those who want to participate but haven't quite figured out yet how to, please reach out to us, because we want to help you be successful becoming part of our community together.
Yep, I was gonna quick jump in and say, yes, please just reach out, because I don't always know everybody who's interested. I am trying to reach out to folks that I know individually, and I'm coming to learn many are on the road to IRB approval, but I wasn't aware of that. And so I'm really happy to hear that, but I just want to know who you are so I can, I and myself and other members of the team can support you where necessary.